episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome again, everybody, to another episode of our show with another wonderful guest that is involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. We are honored today to be joined by Bart Madden, who is an author of several books, but one in particular, the book Free to Choose Medicine, Better Drugs Sooner at Lower Cost, a book that offers an extremely compelling argument for the freedom of patients, obviously guided by the advice of his or her doctor, to make informed decisions about the use of not as of yet FDA-approved therapeutic drugs that are in later stages of clinical testing. Bart is recently retired as managing director of Credit Suisse Holt after a career in money management and investment research that included his founding of Callard Madden Associates. During his career, he was very well known as developing the cash flow return on investment valuation framework that is widely used throughout the money management industry today. Bart is currently an independent researcher and senior fellow at the National Center for Policy Analysis. His research is focused on a variety of themes, including the intersection of knowledge building and wealth creation and the ability to exist simultaneously in businesses. And these themes, as a variety of others, are represented in his books, Value Creation Thinking, The Pragmatic Theory of the Firm Begins with Purpose and Ends with Sustainable Capitalism, Wealth Creation, A Systems Mind for Building and Investing in Businesses for Long-Term, and Reconstructing Your Worldview, the 4 core beliefs you need to solve complex business problems. He is also a proponent of the application of systems thinking to public policy, and his work in public policy has resulted in the Free to Choose Medicine plan, which was originally developed and outlined in a variety of journal articles published in Regulation, Cancer, Biotherapy, and Radiopharmaceuticals and Medical Hypotheses. And he's extremely passionate about the ultimate passage of a Free to Choose Medicine Act, which would be an extremely defining moment for Americans, giving control of very important medical decisions, especially in the area of unmet medical needs, back to individuals and their doctors. All that saying, Bart Madden, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today and talk to us.
Yeah, thanks, Ira. Great to be here.
It's great to have you, and typically we like to start things off by giving our guests the floor just for a little bit to talk about themselves. Could you just take us for a few minutes a little bit on who you are, a little bit of your background, and how someone in money management and economics got so interested in this area of sort of therapeutic development and saving human lives?
Yeah. While I was going through my finance career, I developed a really keen interest in systems thinking and knowledge building. It's more like a passion. So I got in, it's about 17 years ago, I got intrigued by reading the Wall Street Journal, and a Dr. Robert Oldham he published 2-3 op-eds saying, here's a patient, I really believe I could save his life if I could have access to this very innovative phase 2 drug. And what appealed to me as a problem, one, it's enormously important, obviously, but 2, it has to do with systems thinking. And we hear that randomized controlled trials is the gold standard. So if someone like myself proposes something that differs from the gold standard, right away it's viewed with suspicion. Well, let me propose a different gold standard, which has to do with systems thinking. In other words, if you want to improve the performance of a system, such as the FDA regulatory process, 2 things. 1, gain absolute clarity as to the purpose of the system. And 2, find out where is a key constraint and fix that constraint. So, as you can tell from the subtitle of my book, Free to Choose Medicine, Better Drugs Sooner at Lower Cost, better drugs sooner at lower cost should be the purpose of the regulatory system. Therefore, if you look at the FDA's enormously expensive time and money clinical trial process, that is a constraint. So we need an alternative mechanism to circumvent the monopoly that the FDA currently has.
When you talk about, it's interesting, when you talk about systems thinking, and I don't have a background in systems biology, but I've talked to some very interesting folks in that particular area, and you have the complexity, let's say, of the system, and they point out that if you can impact certain nodes in that system, you can affect the system pretty well. In your studying of the problems, obviously you mentioned the FDA, and clearly, there's been a very long history of things going wrong, whether it's thalidomide, elixir sulfanilamide, and so forth, that have led to this extreme hyperregulation, we'll call. On the other hand, you have a pharmaceutical industry that, although they create a lot of great drugs, they've gotten very bad at it over time. Less drugs coming out, billions of dollars more being spent per new entity. What, in your research, what have you found the most crucial nodes, let's say, in this network that are the problem? Is it the FDA? Is it big pharma? Is it something else? Or is it all sort of a big mess that has gotten us to this point of, waiting $5 billion in 20 years for new therapies to come through?
Well, the first point is you can understand the behavior of the FDA is very, very simple. Avoid negative publicity from adverse side effects from approved drugs. Because when that happens, it hits the nightly news and Congress can hold hearings. So here again, the FDA has a monopoly. They can pretty much go at their own pace and what have you. So relentlessly, since 1962, when the legislation was passed for randomized controlled trials and today's modern FDA, the FDA has relentlessly been demanding ever more expensive clinical testing because they don't get the heat from delaying innovative drugs. They get the heat if they approve a drug that then has unanticipated, very adverse side effects. So what you get is deadly overcaution. Keep on demanding more and more and more testing. That's why when I hear the gold standard of randomized controlled trials, now I get it as to the beauty of randomized controlled trials and the statistical effectiveness, but it's taken out of context. In other words, regardless of the cost, keep on demanding more and more and more of this testing. So it's as simple as I said earlier, that what's the goal and what's the constraint? And it's the FDA's regulatory process that is a key constraint, and we need to fix it.
Take us through, if you would, some of the components of free to choose. I mean, you wrote a variety of these papers that now, sort of summarized in the book. Talk a little bit about sort of some of the key things that you are targeting there. And then ultimately, it was mentioned in your bio, so the ultimate passage of what you call the Free to Choose Medicine Act. And then before that, and then we'll get into a sort of a little bit later on, some comparisons to sort of what we have nowadays, whether it's right to try or some of the other stuff that sits in the background that we don't normally think too much about.
Yeah, the quick overview is that in order to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives, we all should want better drugs sooner at lower cost. And that's not happening. And as what we've been talking about, due to this relentless demand of the FDA, it costs about $2.6 billion to get an approved drug, including the cost of failed trials. And it takes 10 to 12 years. Okay, that to no surprise, we have sky-high prescription drug prices. Now, there's a far worse cost, and that is what I've called previously, there's an invisible graveyard of people who had a potential to take a very promising new drug that could have saved their life, and they were denied that freedom. To me, it's a humanitarian tragedy to have that occur in this country, and we need to fix that. So free to choose medicine, in a nutshell, enables patients advised by their doctors to make informed decisions on the use of a not yet approved drug, which has already generated solid clinical results. And that opportunity can give them a chance for health improvement or even save their life that they currently do not have.
One of the models that you've pointed out in the past has obviously been this regenerative medicine rule in Japan, where
Right.
You can access certain therapies after phase 2, and then there's monitoring and so forth. Is the Japanese model a good model? I mean, do you feel this is something that is the ideal, or are there other models that might not be aware of in other countries? I know there's a lot going on in different territories with regard to sort of free zones. So there was one that actually they set up in Hainan Island off the coast of China several years ago, where Merck was actually doing some monoclonal antibody work before the drug was approved here. There's obviously other international locales where they sort of made the concept of medical tourism part of their sort of economic development future. Other interesting models, is Japan a hot one that you like better, or are there other things that we, might not be aware of that you say, hey, that's this may work better in the United States versus, say, this model?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first point is, previously sometimes I'd be criticized saying, well, you have sort of an abstract kind of a public policy idea. And my reply to that is, in the 3rd edition of Free to Choose Medicine, Vernon Smith wrote the foreword, and he strongly endorses all the technical details. It's all worked out. And Vernon won the Nobel Prize in economics partly for his work in deregulating markets.
Mm-hmm.
So free to choose medicine is logically sound. Now, some years ago, an early version of the Free to Choose Medicine book was translated into Japanese. And what happened, apparently it had a big impact on the Japan's version of the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
And they said this made eminent common sense. So in 2014, they passed their version of free to choose medicine that they call conditional approval. Now, it's just like free to choose medicine. You can get access to this new drug 5 to 7 years earlier than the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you say, why did Japan initially start with regenerative medicine drugs? Think of stem cells.
Yeah.
Well, they have this very aging population, and the old people can't wait another 5 to 7 years until some very innovative stem cell treatment that they have access to it. So it made eminent sense for what Japan did. Now, as you can imagine, the proponents of heavy government regulation, they are very upset with what Japan, what I call regulatory innovation, which is going to clearly help Japanese people. So in 2019, there was an article in very prestigious journal, Science, one of the top journals.
Sure.
And boy, they ripped into what Japan implemented, the free to choose medicine concept, and they really ripped into me personally because my book was involved in what Japan has done. 1 second, let me drink some water.
No, take your time.
So this is fascinating stuff. Now, it's common courtesy in a journal, if some authors rip into somebody, yep, I deserve to make a reply. Surely. Now, science is very, very pro heavy regulation. So guess what? My reply, I just didn't hear. I talked to the editor. Oh, it's in process. And eventually, someone sent me an email that I didn't follow the correct format, and they had to reject my paper. So I said, there's a fantastic journal edited by Dan Klein. It's called Econ Journal Watch. And they specialize in publishing articles that have to do with important issues that are in the journals and they're big disagreement. So I sent what science rejected, I sent over to Dan Klein. He accepted it immediately the same day. And we worked it out, edited over the weekend. And it was a journal issue in progress, and he stuck it in. So it got printed immediately. Okay, so by the way, that reply, if you want to find it, if you Google FDA science liberalization, you'll get that article. The other way you can get a lot of stuff on Free to Choose Medicine is a website, www.freetochoosemedicine.com. A lot of videos, a lot of great stuff out there.
Well, we'll put a link to that too in the show information as well. So definitely. Bart, when you're out there, obviously you have a lot of interest, this being one of them. When you're out there talking about free to choose medicine, and you get into, obviously you run into bioethicists probably, and I don't know if you have open debates or whatever the conversation is like, but do you ever look at a bioethicist and want to punch him in the face, or is it, how is somebody's this perspective so different than what seems from a life-saving angle makes so much common sense? They always want to come at you, well, the needs of this cancer patient doesn't outweigh the clinical trial, blah blah blah. What are your conversations with these bioethicists?
Yeah, first off, I don't claim people at the FDA are bad people. I think they're good people, really smart, good people. But if you look, I spent 50 years analyzing business firms. And if you look at a business firm that's seriously underperforming, don't point a finger at some people working in a factory or something. That it's the process that's flawed. And part of the flawed process is a culture that management has instilled that's a dysfunctional culture. So at the FDA, it's a dysfunctional culture. Monopoly, they can do whatever they want. No consumer choice, no competition. Guess what you wind up with? So when people sharply disagree, I like to try and explain that there's a different way of looking at the problem, and just consider looking at it slightly differently. And I say, okay, here are the components of free to choose medicine. One is that after a drug has passed phase 1 safety trials and one or more phase 2 efficacy trials, then it's eligible to be on the free to choose track, which is a parallel track to the FDA's existing clinical trial process. So we're not ripping up or messing around with the existing process. We're offering an alternative, free to choose track. Second, that in order for patients and doctors to be informed, there'll be a trade-off evaluation drug database. Acronym is TEDD, T-E-D-D, Trade-off Evaluation Drug Database, where all of the treatment results, including biomarkers and genetic data for patients, are publicly available via the internet. Okay, the third part is for those drugs that do very, very well on the free to choose track, and a lot of observational real world data supports that this is a safe and effective drug, then that drug developer could get from the FDA observational approval, and therefore not go through the very, very long, expensive trials. So that there are three parts, and if you think about it, free to choose medicine is a dynamic system.
Mm-hmm.
So a free to choose drug is available, especially for a seriously bad disease such as ALS.
Mm-hmm.
Patients try it. If the drug produces very, very favorable results, what will happen? More and more patients will try it. The data becomes more comprehensive. We get better data as more people use it. Patients can make highly informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If the free to choose drug does not perform very well, usage will plummet.
Yep.
So it's a self-adjusting system. So some of the harsh criticism is due to people that initially say, oh, you don't want to use randomized controlled trials or all this kind of stuff. But if they just think about how it would work, and oh, by the way, people would have freedom to access a drug 5 to 7 years earlier than otherwise. Think of an ALS patient. You've got 3-4 years to live. Okay, would this be important to an ALS patient to be able to access, say, the most innovative new drug today, not 5 or 7 years in the future? So if you get into the details of free to choose medicine, it tends to defuse some of the harsh criticism that initially is, shoved my way.
Continuing along that thought, obviously you mentioned conditional approval in Japan. Some companies getting involved there. I know of the case of the Merck antibodies in the China free zone. And then thinking, I spent most of my time in the pharmaceutical industry the last 30 years, but I'm familiar with a couple actually drug companies in the US that have created these very unique, what they call sort of phase 0 departments, where they try to they do the virtual, what's called proof of concept. I can't even really describe it in the sense, it's almost like getting phase 2 data before you even get into phase 1, but that's a whole other story. But we're seeing the movement, albeit slowly, with some creativity in big pharma. Have you been approached by any, obviously nothing confidential, but members of pharma that seem more open nowadays in 2020 to getting involved with these innovative models that can make free to choose more acceptable?
Right. I've had great conversations with pharmaceutical people that I would label big data analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, earlier I mentioned TED, the Trade-off Evaluation Drug Database. That would contain a treasure trove of data, which not only would turbocharge innovation, improve R&D decisions, but imagine there's a drug and it starts off in the free to choose track. More and more people take it. Now we're getting thousands of people.
Yep.
We have genetic data and biomarkers. So literally in real time, we can use big data analytics to find subgroups, patients who do extraordinarily well based on genetic data, for example, and patients where it doesn't work very well at all. So instead of waiting endlessly for normal clinical trials to get this kind of data, it would be in real time. So the big data analytic people, they love this idea. And if you think about it, if you go back to 1962, when the legislation was passed creating the FDA, that was passed with in that bygone era of technology from the early 60s.
Yep.
We've got the internet, we got big data analytics. All of these tools could immediately be put to use with TED and free to choose medicine. And if you just think of how innovation would accelerate with this, it'd be a phenomenal good thing to the whole biopharmaceutical industry.
Yep. You know, we're wrapping up 2020 now. This was a very rough year. We were hit by this major pandemic, of course. But as part of this pandemic, we saw two things. We saw the ability of, well, albeit in vaccines, the ability of the pharma players to do trials very quickly, and emergency use. Regulators approving things very quickly. Now, obviously, this is a unique situation, but how do you feel the pandemic of 2020 and what we see on the regulatory and pharma development front in terms of Operation Warp Speed and all this stuff benefits free to choose story?
Well, after the virus passes, we're going to go back to business as usual at the FDA. And so maybe the public has gotten a taste for having things move along a bit quicker. So what we really need is a structural reform. And Japan is a test case. And here again, with free to choose medicine, individuals would decide for themselves. It's voluntary. If a person says, I only want to use FDA-approved drugs, fine, no problem. But people have unique health conditions and unique preferences for risk. So free to choose medicine enables them to have that freedom. So what's fascinating to me is, for a long time, I've been pushing this idea, and early on, people would look at me like I wasn't even on planet Earth. Okay, now all of a sudden, Japan has implemented this. We're talking about doing things that resonate with people dealing with their health. That Patients Like Me is a fantastic website. It got started some years ago to communicate data information for ALS patients. Now it has close to 1 million subscribers, thousands of diseases, and the information that people have is being transmitted to one another, and they're also involved in doing advanced research. This is fantastic stuff, and people want to get involved. Now, Dr. Ron Bruce was CEO of a very successful biotech company and got acquired, I think, by Johnson & Johnson. He tried to get his father, who was dying from cancer, access to a drug he thought could save his father's life. He's CEO of a biotech company. He wasn't able to do it. Yeah. So what he formed an organization called mytomorrows.com. And if you go to MyTomorrows, it's outside the US, and they connect people. First of all, they have all the data, so you can look at approved versus not approved drugs. And if you're outside the US, they will facilitate connecting you with a drug manufacturer. Okay, so this is what free to choose medicine is doing. And if you go to their website, MyTomorrows, it says every patient should have access to all possible treatment options. So now we have a worldwide commercial operation doing the same thing that free to choose medicine is about. This is not some abstract policy idea. It makes eminent common sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm familiar with MyTomorrows and some of the other versions of that model. It's exciting seeing it happen and come to fruition, and familiar with those stories. So yeah, it's go Good.
Now, earlier I mentioned this is a humanitarian tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And a good friend of mine is Frank Burroughs.
Okay.
And many
Abigail
years
Alliance.
ago, his daughter Abigail got cancer, and she actually died when she was 21, valedictorian of her high school class, an incredible young woman. And Frank tried to get her in a clinical trial for a drug. Actually, it became known as Erbitux.
Right.
And he had the top oncologists who said this could save Abigail's life. Okay, well, he couldn't get in the first clinical trial because her cancer was in the wrong spot. Okay, the second time he tried in another clinical trial, they said, well, now Abigail is too sick. So this is why I say it's a human tragedy. Now, what Frank did is he formed the Abigail Alliance for better access to developmental drugs. And he's been working with cancer patients for years, trying to facilitate, access to drugs that could save their life. And sometimes, if you think about what's going on with the whole FDA regulatory monopoly, if you peel back the onion, you'll see this assumption: hey, you're not smart enough to make these decisions, right? So that's why we need, they say they're very complicated, you need this government monopoly. Okay, here's Frank with the Abigail Alliance. They don't have TED, okay, they don't have a lot of high-powered data, but they figure out drugs in phase 2 and phase 3, the really good stuff. So the Abigail Alliance, Frank told me, they had fought for access to over 40 developmental drugs. How many of those drugs eventually were approved by the FDA? Every one, every single one. So the idea we're not smart enough just doesn't hold water.
Yeah, absolutely. Bart, it's, as you mentioned early on about systems thinking, I mean, you really, it's great to see how your initiatives have created another system here and all these components, whether the Abigail Alliance, My Tomorrows, the networking with different companies and out there in the in the process of putting this all together. It's really I take my hat off to you, and it's clearly an extremely important point and part of the model that we need to see to break free of this, the process that, as you said, has existed since the early 1960s that just doesn't always make sense in 2020. So it's
on the notion of systems thinking, everyone wants innovation, and they say, we want out of the box, scientific thinking and what have you. Here's the existing system. Okay, Ira, you be a venture capitalist. I've just started a small biotech company, and I've got the top scientific talent with a really radical but soundly grounded, hypothesis to do with a deadly disease. I come to you, I want some venture capital funding. You say, well, about 10 years from now, you'll be in a phase 3 trial. And since your thinking is so much different, what's the FDA going to do for these statistical milestones? Since you're so different, they'll probably have incredibly difficult milestones because they're deadly overcautious.
Right.
Okay, so you say, well, I think I'll pass on this venture capital funding. Now, with Free to Choose Medicine, I come back to you and I say, I have the top scientific talent here. With Free to Choose Medicine, in 36 months, we'll be giving our new drug on the Free to Choose track. We will get real world data and find out if we're right that this is a new standard of care. I think you might make a different calculation on funding, a venture capital funding for that kind of a company. Mm-hmm. So that is really big. And These are the kinds of things where the critics have not thought through all of the interconnected elements of a system, such as the free to choose medicine. And let me talk one other point, that I believe free to choose medicine really should be a bipartisan effort, not people on the right, people on the left, Democrats, Republicans. We should, for the common good, we should get together and pass this legislation. And let me give you an example of the bipartisan nature.
Please.
I met Diane Abbott. Now, Diane Abbott is a brilliant lawyer. And for decades, she has successfully championed causes that you would put on the left. And as a matter of fact, in the early 1990s, she was a key person confronting the FDA, demanding early access to AIDS drugs. That's Diane Abbott.
Yep.
Okay, now you look at me, people say, oh, free market capitalist. I get pigeonholed clearly on the far right. I don't like being pigeonholed, but that's how it works. Now, Diane and I have common ground.
Sure.
As far as economic progress goes, we want progress that'll lift all boats. And as far as a regulatory process, we want better drugs sooner at lower cost. So we wrote an op-ed recently. I got it right here. Seniors suffer the most from antiquated FDA approval process. That was actually Diane's angle on that. So let me very quickly read what Diane wrote in this op-ed. It's very relevant. Not only have our seniors been struck in their final years with a hideous virus, but they are also the victims of an antiquated drug approval process that is nearly 6 decades old and in need of drastic improvement.
There we go.
Okay, some more. Now is the time for the United States to take this bold step forward and create an accelerated approval pathway for developmental treatments that give patients and doctors greater control over their health care. Expanding parallel track to include a publicly available database of real-world treatment results would accelerate biopharmaceutical innovation, reduce development costs, and lower drug prices while expanding new standards of care. Diane finishes, seniors can't wait 10 to 12 years to have a drug approved, nor can they pay for drugs that are priced to quickly recoup the $2.6 billion it costs to gain approval. With the expansion of parallel track, more seniors will be able to walk out of hospitals and live longer lives. That's great stuff. It's a bipartisan kind of a deal. I think that the key point is politicians need to, in a bipartisan fashion, get together and say, it's not the left, it's not the right, it's about ultimately taking care of patients and fundamentally improving the entire biopharmaceutical regulatory process.
Wonderful. Bart, it's exciting. I know you've been working on this a long time, but it's clearly become something a bit bigger since I first looked at it several years ago. So I am wishing you the best with everything that you're doing, and want to spread the word any other way we can get involved, that'd be great. But really wishing you the best with it. And for everybody that's going to be listening on the podcast or watching on this network, you're listening to Bart Madden, author of Free to Choose Medicine, Better Drugs Sooner at Lower Cost, making this extremely compelling argument for freedom of patients with their clinicians to access development stage therapeutics to save lives, and really fascinating concepts. Also, pick up his books, Value Creation Thinking, Wealth Creation, Reconstructing Your Worldview. They're all available on Amazon. Check out his Free to Choose Medicine website. We'll have the link in the bio section. But Bart, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while, and thank you for everything you're doing. And as we say, thank you for creating a better tomorrow for all of us. It's been a real pleasure seeing you after talking all these years.
Thanks a lot, Ira. Let's make 2021 the year that we pass free to choose medicine legislation.
That'll be awesome. That'll be awesome.